Attendance is on. So please mark your attendance. Let us wait for maybe one more minute. Okay? Okay, I don't think the attendance is improving. I could see that there are 59 responses for attendance, but there are 43 people, which is fine. I don't really care much about. In fact, it's better if you tell me in advance that you are not attending the class. On such days, we can probably shift to Google Meet. Anyhow, so okay, so I have about the projects. I have already responded to most of the emails that came. It it usually takes a little more time for me to respond back to your mails, but yeah, I think I have responded back to most of the emails already. I guess a couple more are left, so that I will do. Some of you, I mean, for most cases, I have basically said yes to whatever projects you have chosen. Maybe I think two or three cases, the project description is not sufficient. You will have to elaborate more upon what exactly is it that you are trying to achieve. So to those groups, I have said, please give me a more detailed description, and if that description seems fine, I'll let you guys go ahead with the groups. But yeah, for most of the emails that I have received, it seems fine. But I'm sure I have not yet received enough number of emails. So there are a number of people out there who have not sent me an email. I'll wait till today probably. Okay, before I start checking what people have not formed groups, and I really don't like doing these things, but that is something that you were supposed to do during the previous week itself. So I hope that by tonight I have at least all the people which all the groups have at least sent me one email. Okay, one mail where you have responded back with your project and everything. But by tonight, I expect everyone's group details in my mailbox. If you don't do that, then I really don't know what to do. But there might be some penalty or something like that. Okay. Okay, guys. So let's start then. Okay. Okay, so we are finally in week 6, and from week 6 onwards, we actually start looking at some of the designing stuff. Till now, it was mostly about object oriented programming and concepts related to it. Week 6 onwards, we are going to have a look at two different things. Okay, first of all, from next week onwards, we'll start looking at this week again is about C++ coding. So I'll tell you about two more things in C++, which are probably going to be essential if you are planning to build a project. Other than that, from next week onwards, we are going to have a look at system building skills. So we'll talk about how to use threading. We'll talk about how to use networking, things like these. So these will be in very, we'll talk about how to create UI. Some of you are already interested in building UIs. So these, I mean, of course, we cannot cover these things in detail because this requires a complete, what can I say, a more dedicated way of doing these things. But I'm going to give you a peek of all these things in as short as possible. So then from there onwards, it's up to you, right? If you want to, for example, if the threads part interested you more, you can explore the threading part more, or if the UI part intrigues you, you can study more about that, so on and so forth. So from there onwards, it's up to you. You know, it's more about showing you how many directions are there. I am not going to walk for you in that direction, but you are certainly free to choose any one of them. But this week onwards, we are going to start with UML. So UML, or Unified or Universal Modeling Language, is a standard. Okay, it's something that people are expected to use. Okay, we'll see the merits and demerits of UML. But where does UML fit in? So let us try to first understand that. So assume that you are now given the task. Assume that we are back to uh, the physical classes. You know, that world which we are missing dearly. Assume that we are back in that world where physical classes have started, and things have gone back to normal. Um, you are now supposed to be part of a small team, let us say 2 or 3 member team, who's given the task of planning a trip for, let us say, your batch. Okay, so how would you go about it, right? And assume that certain set of decisions are already made for you, like what is the location. Let's say you are going to Goa, right? And I've heard going to Goa is one of the best what can I say, made up things that people do, that you know, we are planning to go to Goa, but they never do. Anyhow, so let's say you are planning a trip to Goa, and you are the person who's supposed to chalk out all the details. How will you really go about your work, right? So one way to do this is that you start doing all the planning and documentation. Of course, there's a traditional way where you do it in a chaotic fashion. Probably that is more fun too. But the other way is to do it using a very systematic fashion. So you figure out all the possibilities. You figure out what are the options at each point, and then you critically pick one option out of all based on different reasons and constraints. So assume that we are that boring kind of people who are trying to over plan a trip. So what kind of details are you probably going to chalk out? Okay, so probably the first set of information you will require will be about the routes. Okay, so assume that we are going from Lucknow to Goa. So what are the different ways in which I can go from Lucknow to Goa, right? So you can probably travel by air, by train, by road, or you can have a combination of these, right? So you basically go from point X to point Y via train, and from Y to Z via air, or and then Z to some other place via road. So basically, it is possible that you make a combinations, or it's possible that you simply take one of these modes. And different options, all of these options will have different aspects to it, right? There will be different costs, and there will be different traveling time as well. So the overall information, whatever information you will collect, in some ways you can say that this is static in nature. What do I mean by static? Basically, it is highly unlikely that this information changes during your travel, right? I mean, once you figured it out, that is pretty much going to be it, right? So the travel by air would probably be costliest out of the three. I'm not sure, right? I really don't know. For long distances, maybe traveling by road would also be very costly. But yeah, that is in general the rule, that traveling by air is often costlier as compared to, let's say, traveling by train or traveling by road. And this fact is most probably going to stick. Okay, it is not going to be a fact which changes in between your journey, right? It is probably going to be the same. So if you start thinking about the trip as some kind of a tangible element, you know, some kind of, let's say, human being. So what these things are really are pretty much structural in nature. Structural as in your body's structure doesn't really change every day, right? I mean, if you are, let us say, 5 feet 9, you'll probably remain 5 feet 9 for the next few days or next few weeks as well, right? Even if it changes very slowly. Otherwise, it doesn't change at all. Or you know, so the overall idea is that structural aspects, the structural details of any solution are basically the details which are static in nature, and they usually do not change over the course of over a long course of time. Okay, and in this way, the structural aspect of a solution shows the overall sketch of the different elements and their connections, right? So the point is that if you go back to the body example, so basically the structural aspect of your body will probably remain the same. Your hands are not going to get bigger so soon, your legs are not going to get shorter so soon, so on and so forth. Your structure, your body's structure will, it doesn't change every day. It takes a long amount of time to get it changed. The other aspect that you are supposed to figure out for this trip will be things like dates and times, right? So when do you start the journey? What during what point of the day? Whether you start at morning or night, and because based on that your destination arrival will change. Then you'll have to think about whether you stop anywhere or you'll go straight. There be any refreshments during the travel? You have to plan for emergencies. So what happens if there is flat tire or the flight gets delayed? How will you handle all these things? So this whole these kind of planning information that requires imagining in your head how would the trip actually go through, right? You in your head you imagine, okay, we started from Lucknow at this point of time, then we are going from here to here. Okay, what if something goes wrong here? We'll do this. Maybe at this point of time we'll stop at Kanpur and have some tea, so on and so forth. So basically you have to imagine how will the system, how will your solution look like in the real time. And you may have to deal with the dynamic aspects of your trip. Dynamic aspects as in what happens when the trip is already in place. Okay, the structural part, as I said, is the kind of information that is not really going to change during your trip. The dynamic information is something which is much harder. Okay, you have to imagine, you have to figure out what could go wrong, what is right, what is wrong. So the dynamic aspect of your trip is something which in terms of computer science we also call as behavioral details, right? So there are two types of details for any kind of solution: the structural details and the behavioral details. The behavioral details are essentially details which give you an idea of how does the system work, how does the solution work at the runtime while it is executing. Okay? Whereas the structural aspect of a system describes to you what exactly is the system consisting of. Okay, what are the different elements, how do they relate to each other? So is this part clear, the static versus dynamic part? What exactly, you can also think about some other example. I'm not sure what should be the best example. Let's take the example of automobiles again, right? So structural information about an automobile will be things like, how many seater is this car? Can it seat five, or can it seat six, or can it seat four? This is the kind of information that is highly unlikely to change, whether the car is at rest or whether it is moving on. The number of people who can sit is something that is going to be constant. The amount of fuel that its fuel tank can take in, okay, that is another structural information. It is probably not going to change when you drive the car. The dynamic information is something like what could be a possible temperature of the engine when your car is running, right? Because the engine temperature might fluctuate if you are running the car for a long time. One of the problems that you might face is that the engine temperature might go significantly high, and you probably have to solve that, you probably need some cooling mechanism installed in the car. And what if the cooling mechanism is not working? Then what happens? So this is a kind of dynamic information. Okay, you have to imagine the car being run, being used, and then how do these different states of the car are managed, right? So maybe the first state of the car is you start it, right? I mean, you switch it on. Then the next state is it starts moving forward. Another state is it basically starts moving backwards, so on and so forth. So all this information is related to how the car works when it is being used. So this is the difference between structural information and the behavioral information. Structural information, and coming back to our human being example, your behavior might change very very often, right? You might be very happy in the morning when you just woke up. Then you started attending lectures, and slowly your mood starts becoming annoyed. Okay, and maybe towards the end of the lecture, you are again elated, so on and so forth, right? So your behavior is likely to change much more often as compared to the structure of your body. So this is from where these you can consider this to be structural and behavioral things. So whenever you talk about a solution, it need not necessarily be a software solution. It could be anything in the real world. Usually you can see the details related to the solution in terms of two different dimensions: structural as well as behavioral. Any doubts, any queries over this? Chats as well. So is this idea clear? What exactly is structural? What exactly is behavioral? Structural is something that is not really going to change often. It is basically a kind of a skeleton of your solution. And behavioral is basically a runtime snapshot. When the things started going on, what are the possibilities that can happen? Good as well as bad. Clear? Any queries?
Sir, instead of static, can we think of structural as constant?
Um, Actually, the problem is they are not really constant. They are still prone to change. The reason I said it's the change that the changing frequency is low is because it's very hard to make structural changes. That is the idea. Usually, whenever you are trying to build a solution, so I gave the example of human body, right? It's very hard to make you taller or shorter, right? I mean, it's a hard task. Similarly, it's very hard to make an existing car, let us say from 4-seater to 5-seater, or 5-seater to 6-seater, right? It's a hard task, right? It doesn't mean that it is not possible, but usually when we plan a solution, the structural details are something which in general do not change. Okay, they are almost like a constant but not a constant. And the reason may be because the cost of making changes in the structural aspect might be too high compared to the cost of making changes in the behavior. So it's up to you. You can visualize it the way you want. You can say constant and changing. I mean, the idea is you should understand that what detail of a system is structural. You can consider it to be constant or whatever way you can imagine them to be. And the other part is behavioral, right? Another aspect of seeing this is uh, the whole concept of compile in terms of software analogies. We are talking about compile time decisions, or let us say design time decisions which happen much before, let us say, the code has been written, versus some things which we have for which we'll have to think about this running snapshot of the system. Okay, so what happens when the system is running? That is why in many cases these dynamic changes are not easily predictable, because there might be some situation which you simply did not think of, and your system actually goes into that state. So dynamic behavior, the behavioral aspect, it is harder to predict because you're trying to imagine your system already in place and trying to predict how will it behave, right? How will it behave? That is why behavioral. Versus how will your system look like? Okay, so look like is in some ways the structural part. Is it clear? So the idea is that whenever you are going to design a solution, you guys are going to build a project, right? So the structural details are essentially the classes of your system. Okay, you'll say these are the classes of my system, and once you have decided upon it, you'll start writing code. If you actually want to change your classes, if you want to introduce a new class, if you want to remove a new class, the amount of code change that will be required will be very high. So the cost of making changes in question. So the cost of making structural changes is usually much higher. So that is why we normally fix these structural aspects in the beginning of a project, and we try to stick with it. That is the idea. Whereas for behavioral things, we can try our best to predict how the system might look like, um, and that is where essentially your skills come in as a software practitioner. How much can you predict beforehand? But usually it is not a foolproof thing. You may have to keep on refining these aspects of the system as the system gets built. Okay, any more queries? Okay. So now let us say some way you were able to figure out all the details, okay, the structural as well as behavioral details, the static as well as dynamic details of your. Uh, I think someone unmuted. If there is a question, you can ask. Okay. So let us say some way you were able to chalk out all these details, the structural details as well as the behavioral details. Okay, so suppose that you planned the trip like a pro, and now what is it that you have to do next? All the travelers, they must be communicated what are your plans, right? What exactly have you planned? That must be communicated to the travelers. And what could be one way to do that? This is how uh, I've seen people, the people in authority do it like this. I used to do it like this, that I'll prepare a long PDF and or a very long email where I'll write things in, step by step fashion, and I'll send it over to everyone and expect that they are going to read it. Okay, but we all know that it hardly happens, right? I mean, I remind you guys 10 times that the exam will finish off at this particular point of time. You can submit the form multiple times, but in each exam there is at least one or two exceptions who will not submit their form within time, and right at the moment of right at the moment when I switch it off, there will be an email saying, "Oh, we forgot to submit it, and now our internet is not working." Things like this, right? So it's a problem, right? Human beings, um, we are not really the best species in the world, to be honest. We are often lazy. We often do not care about details. We just take things casually. So this way of communicating often does not really work that well. The sincere guys will probably read it. The others will simply ignore it, saying, "We'll see what happens." The other way to communicate your decisions is via some kind of a graphical content. So now I am not really a UX person, a user experience design person, but if you meet these UX guys, they'll tell you that often um, representing the same information via some kind of graphical means is much easier and much easily absorbable for human beings as compared to reading the text. So the other way in which you can try to communicate the details of the trip is by some innovative, well crafted graphical content, right? So this is an example. So one way to communicate is this. We are basically writing stuff in text. We will travel from Lucknow to Delhi via train. We will tell you from Delhi to Goa by air. So this is like a textual version of the information that you are trying to get through. Or the other way is you basically put something like this in the email. You basically say Lucknow, train, Delhi, air, Goa. Now, which of these two seems better, right? I mean, I'm not saying one is better than the other. Some people might actually say this is better, and I am one of those people. If you are giving me um any kind of documentation, I'm a kind of a person who would read everything, right? I mean, if you've written point by point, I will read it point by point. I mean, I'll either not read it at all or I'll read it in full. So for me, this version is actually much better, because the chances of misunderstanding are much less here as compared to this one, right? But you will know that those people who are not having a habit of of reading, for them they might actually tell you that this is better. It's much easier. You can simply look at this and understand, okay, Lucknow Delhi train and Delhi to Goa air. Now the problem with this whole concept of representing information graphically is the semantics. Semantics as in, to anyone whom you are going to send this information to, that person should have the exact same understanding of the semantics that are being used in this graphic, right? So what do I mean by this? Here what we are really doing is we are putting an arrow and then we are putting some text over this arrow, and there is some kind of an implied meaning of this, right? I mean, I didn't actually write what this arrow and this text mean. It's natural for us the human beings. For most people, this kind of a notation is very natural. You don't have to explain it to someone. But in most cases this might not be possible, okay? Especially cases where the decisions you have to communicate are much more complicated as compared to the one that we just saw. So in such a case, these set of conventions, these semantics associated with whatever graphics you are creating, might even become a liability for you as well, right? Because let's just have another look here. That in another scenario, you are saying that we'll probably travel from Lucknow to Delhi via train, then Delhi to Goa by air, and while we return, we'll travel from Goa to Delhi via train and Delhi to Lucknow via bus, right? So this is one way to represent the same information. And now you can see that okay, it's slightly more complicated than the one that we saw before, right? And what if someone decides to write it like this, right? You use a two-way arrow, you write train here, then something here, then bus here, air, something here, train here. Now you can see that there are many ways to represent the same information graphically. The only problem here is, how do you basically say one representation is better than the other, right? The only way I can say this is, as long as the people who are going to see this particular graphics, they are able to understand what I wanted to communicate, I am fine, right? But this is not really an easy job, right? uh, a set of conventions must be made beforehand. What do I mean by set of conventions? You should really know what each arrow and what each box and what each piece of text in this image really means. Unless you do that, it is going to be difficult for you to understand what exactly is it that the person is trying to communicate. This is one of the major issues with graphical modes of communication. So UML, and as you can already understand where we are going with this, when you make such decisions for a software solution, communicating it to the stakeholders is again a challenging task. Okay, again, one way to do that is you write those PDFs. You write things in great detail, that our system will have these many classes. Each class will have these many attributes, so on and so forth. So one problem is that one way to do that is that you communicate it via text. But as I said, not many people will understand it. It is, of course, much better to simply create a diagram, and then adopt some conventions where you say, if this box is present in my diagram, this is what it means. So UML is a set of conventions. It is basically a standard, and what it really does is this. It essentially gives you a kind of a modeling language. It gives you a set of conventions, constraints, and say, if you want to communicate the design of your system, this is the way to do that. Okay? These are some of the ways in which you can do that. So the UML, or the Universal Modeling Language, in fact, some of you probably have already started working on projects. So you will again face the same dilemma, that text versus graphical mode, right? This dilemma will be there. And if you want to use the graphical mode, this is where UML can help you. So the idea if in a nutshell, what UML gives you are a set of boxes and lines. Okay, that is the easiest way to look at any graphical standard. They are basically going to be boxes and lines, right? The boxes could be of different shapes. They could be ovals, they could be rectangles, they could be rhombus, they could be anything, right? And then there will be lines. These lines could be solid, dotted, curved, whatever it is, right? I mean, so there will be if you guys have already studied graph theory, there will be nodes and there will be edges. And what any convention is going to do is it is going to give you a set of predefined meanings to different types of nodes and different types of edges. And as long as everyone understands this node and edge language, you can communicate your system's details, right? So UML is basically it consists of many different types of diagrams. Okay, we'll have a look at some of them in this course. But UML provides you with a set of diagrams. In for each diagram, UML has some predefined set of conventions. Okay, so it will tell you that if you are creating this particular diagram, these are the kind of things you can put. These are the kind of boxes and these are the kind of lines that you can put in this diagram. And this is what it means. This is the semantic of this box and this is the semantic of this array. So in a nutshell, this is what UML is. You have some details to communicate to your stakeholders. Of course, these details are associated with modeling your system. And in order to do that, you can use these UML diagrams. There are many UML diagrams, by the way. In general, we don't use all of them. Only a few of these UML diagrams are used in a typical system. But the good thing about UML is standardization. That if I give you a UML diagram and I say that this diagram adheres to all the UML specifications, then the amount of ambiguity, the different ways in which that particular diagram can be interpreted, going back to that arrow example, that two-way arrow example. So if I tell you beforehand that this is what two-way arrow means, and this is what what happens when I write X pipe Y, right? If I tell you this in advance, then putting the information in that format is not a problem. So this is exactly what UML is going to do for you. Now there are different types of UML diagrams, as I said, but you can divide them into those two categories that we studied. The structural diagrams. So structural diagrams are the diagrams which are going to be helpful for you in communicating the structural details of the system. Okay, and the one way to look at structural diagrams is that they describe the entities of your system and how do they relate to each other. This is the major idea of using structural diagrams. And there are actually many different structural diagrams available to you, but some common structural diagrams that are often used are class diagrams. Class diagram is probably the single most uh, used diagram in UML. And I think you guys already have an idea. We've discussed uh, in brief what class diagrams are. Basically, they describe the details of the classes in a particular system. That this is the example we saw it in lecture 2.1. It was that postal request example, right? So there we said that there is a class called abstract postal request, and then this letter postal request inherits this class, right? So now you can, now since we have already covered inheritance, you can understand why I did this, right? Because there are some pieces of information which are here, and I simply want to inherit it into the other class. So this is one way to do it. And these are some of the other relationships that we studied, right? Aggregation and association. We study class diagrams at depth. But the other kind of diagrams that you see in the structural category will include the package diagrams. So a package diagram essentially shows the behavior of your system at subsystems level. So what do I mean by subsystems? You can say that if you are going to build a e-com solution, an e-commerce solution, what will be the different subsystems of this solution? So there will be some piece of code, some subsystem which is going to show the user the product catalog. There will be probably another subsystem which manages the cart where you keep on adding stuff. There might be another subsystem which deals with order creation, order manipulation, order cancellation, refunds, stuff like that. There might be another subsystem which deals with the payment gateway so that you can easily pay and come back. So these are different subsystems. So if you want to show how different subsystems of your system relate to each other and how do these classes sit within these different subsystems, you can use the package diagram. And then deployment diagrams are a set of diagrams where you try to show that assuming that I have 3 or 4 servers in my application, I say that server A is going to have the cart module, server B is going to have the order module, server C is going to have something else, so on and so forth. So the deployment diagrams basically show you what part of your system is being run at what physical infrastructure, that is, and how do they, so what, how do they connect to each other. They might be connected through a lease line, they might be connected through some wireless interface, so on and so forth. So all those things are shown in deployment diagrams. Again, keep this in mind that in all these 3 cases, okay, you are only showing the structural details of the system. Okay, it's highly unlikely that you will add a new server in the morning and take it out in the evening, right? I mean, you might add a server or remove a server, but these decisions are long term decisions. Okay, you stick with them for a long term. So similarly, the subsystems that are going to be a part of your system, you don't change them often, right? I mean, it's highly unlikely that a subsystem gets added in the morning and then gets removed in the night. So again, and similarly, the classes of your system, you decide upon what classes do I need, and then you stick with them. You don't change this information very often. So this is, as I said, the structural aspect of your system. The other type of diagrams you have are the behavioral diagrams, right? And behavioral diagrams basically try to show you the interaction between different elements of your system at the runtime. And this at the runtime part is very important, because as I said, right, behavior is something that is not static. Okay, uh, structure, and let me try to say it, that structure can be of non-living things as well, but non-living things usually do not have behavior. It's the living things which have behavior, right? Because we are living, we are live, we change, we move, we talk. So similarly, the behavioral aspect of a system needs to be captured, and it really means how the system works at the runtime. So some examples of these behavioral diagrams are use case diagrams. So a use case diagram is essentially a kind of end-to-end expectation from a system. So let us say a use case diagram for ATM machine will look something like this. User walks into the ATM, user puts the card in the ATM, user is prompted for the pin, user puts the pin, user is prompted for the options, right? Withdraw money, uh, show statement, so on and so forth. User selects one, so on and so forth. So you basically show the whole scenario, that this is one use case, that the user wants to withdraw cash. So what happens from, for you define everything step by step in a use case diagram, that there is a user, the user is coming and going to interact with your system, and these are the steps that are going to happen. So this is a use case diagram, where a use case literally means a scenario, that for one particular scenario your system is supposed to behave like this. So you use these use case diagrams to describe the functionality, the expectations from your system. The sequence diagram show the timeline of events on, let us say, a kind of a linear scale, and it shows how do different objects interact with each other over a timeline, as in, so you say that for the same ATM case, you basically say, the moment user puts in the ATM card, there is an event. Okay, what is that event? Card inserted. So now there might be some object in your system. A new object might be created in your system which represents user's card, and from here onwards you are going to call some methods on this object, right? So the first method could be verify pin, card object dot verify pin. In the verify pin part, you basically prompt the user to give the pin. The user gives the pin, and then you probably contact another object in the system, which is, let us say, the authenticator object. So in the you pass the card number and whatever details, as well as the pin code to the authenticator object, which authenticates, which sees if the pin is correct or not, and then it returns a true or false, saying that yeah, the details are correct. Then based on that, you might call another function. So in a timeline based fashion, you say the first method that was called was create card object. Second method that was, and that was probably done by some universal object, the ATM object. Okay, it created a new object. Then from there onwards, you started calling more methods. So the sequence diagram shows you a timeline of how different events occurred in your system and what really happened whenever that event occurred. The state machine diagrams, they basically represent your system in terms of dynamic states, right? So again, going back to that ATM example, what state could an ATM machine be at any point of time? It could be lying idle. There is no card. So what do you display on the screen? You display something like, please insert your card. As soon as someone inserts a card, the state of the ATM changes, right? So let us say the new state is card inserted. So now what happens? You do some processing. You ask user to enter a pin. As soon as the pin is entered, the state of the machine changes again. So now it is now connected to a particular account, a particular bank account. So the next thing is, let us say the user says, I want to withdraw money. So now the ATM is another state. Okay, it is counting cash, for example. So these are different states in which this ATM machine can go, and a state machine diagram. And this is something that we saw again in the lecture 2.1. So a state machine diagram basically shows how the state of a particular object changes at runtime. Okay, what happens? What on what event does the state changes? So if you want to convey this type of information back to the user, back to the stakeholders, this is the kind of diagram you use. And over the next few weeks, next 3 weeks, I think, we will study different types of diagrams. We will not study all of them. As I said, the reason for this is that UML itself has some drawbacks. The major drawback with UML is that you guys have we have already seen it, that if your code is not strictly object oriented. So for example, in our toy examples, we had this friend function for repairing the toy. So representing these kind of global functions, which are not really part of any particular class, is a difficult thing in UML, because there is really no way to represent non-object oriented entities in UML. So it has a very strong bias towards object oriented methodology. And if your system is not designed purely on these object oriented concepts, there are other elements in your system as well, then it might be very difficult to use UML. So that is one of the drawbacks for UML. Another issue that you'll see, when you start using UML, is that in many cases these diagrams seem to be an overkill, as in you first have to learn all those conventions, and then you have to design those diagrams. In many cases there are constraints if you want to strictly follow the conventions. So there might be certain constraints which will actually increase the amount of time it will take to create these designs. And that is why some people often say that UML is basically too much design. Um, it's like it's good to spend time on designing, but maybe using UML is an overkill. It's probably too much design. So that is a problem. And this because of this problem, most people do not really follow UML conventions strictly. I don't follow them as well. Okay, so basically, I will have to study so many these conventions all over again in order to teach it to you, because I don't really use UML conventions strictly. Yes, there are certain conventions that stick in your mind, and those conventions are loosely followed by the people in industry. But in many cases, people don't really stick to UML. Okay. And by the way, one aspect of UML that I did not talk about is that there is a research field, okay, where there's a whole field of researchers where they try to do code generation from UML diagrams. Okay, so if you are a good designer who creates these diagrams following all the conventions that UML has, then it is very easy, right? Because as I said, you remove ambiguities if you use UML strictly, right? And if ambiguities have been removed, in at least in some cases, it should be possible to generate some code. Most of the time, this code is not really useful. The code that is generated is kind of skeleton code. So uh, uh, these uh, these tools that are available, they'll create the classes in C++ or Java or whatever language it is. They'll create the fields for you, they'll create methods with empty implementations. So at least up to this part, people have already worked, and there are tools which can do it for you. But as I said, right, I mean, these capabilities are just not enough. As of now, there is really no direct way of you know converting UML based documentations directly into code. So that is why I said that in many cases people say UML is just an unnecessary step. If the only thing that you want to do is communicate your design decisions to your stakeholders, maybe there is a very simpler fashion to do that. Okay, maybe you create a diagram with a key element, right? I mean, you put a key to the on the left or right hand bottom side, and you define that this is what my box means and this is what my lines mean, and then in that case you don't have to care about UML. So these are some of the drawbacks associated with UML, which is why even though it is a standard, it's a very good standard. Its adoption in industry is still not um, as expected, right? Because it's probably tedious to learn UML, and then it's even more tedious to use it. Okay, so that is it. Any questions? No questions? Okay, fine. So as I said about projects, please send me your project details as quickly as possible, and please start now working on your projects. I think I have already told some of you to go ahead. Maybe a couple more, a couple of groups. I have asked them to resubmit their descriptions, but for most people, I have said go ahead. So please start working on your projects. We will study more QML. No, that is the idea. You don't have to have all of them. Okay. The idea, and this is why I started from that trip example. Okay. All those examples were kind of unnecessary. But what I wanted to communicate to you is that many a times people feel that it's a necessity to communicate my systems design in terms of UML. No, that is not really the case. So you have to understand where UML comes into picture. The idea of using UML is to communicate your system's design, and that is why often UML is used in large projects. Okay, large projects as in where the diagrams are extremely complicated, and if you have to explain it to someone in text, it will probably take 2 pages, 3 pages, 4 pages just to explain that diagram, right? So in that case, it is much better to use UML conventions and draw it as a diagram, and then expect that the person who's going to read it also understands UML, right? But as I said, for many projects, for instance, for people for projects like yours, it is an overkill to use UML. But because we are doing these projects as part of a learning experience, try to use as many diagrams as you can. I will still expect that there is at least one structural and at least one behavioral diagram, at least. Actually, behavioral, there should be at least two, I think, for to capture different aspects. um, you should at least have, for example, a state transition diagram, or some use case diagram. Use case diagrams are easy. You should certainly have use case diagrams, and activity diagrams, sequence diagrams. So there are actually different types of behavioral diagrams. So I expect that there will be at least one structural diagram as part of your project, and there will be two, three behavioral diagrams. You don't have to use all. It's a waste of time, as I said. But yeah, because we are learning UML right now, please do use these diagrams in your projects. Any more queries? And as I have said, I'm not really that much interested in in your actual code. I'll be more interested in seeing how you have designed your system. It is not a ITP project, okay? It's a project in object oriented methodology. So I want you guys to learn. In fact, some of the students who have sent me solutions of their practice lab, which is very good, by the way. You should keep doing this. One thing that I have realized is that it is not easy to take your mind away from that ITP mode, right? Most of you are still trying to simply achieve things at the code level. You are not really looking at the big picture. You are not really thinking about how should I design the classes. You are still more oriented towards achieving the output. So please, in the two lab exams that we will have, you guys will fare really poorly if you don't understand what I'm trying to say. Okay. Output is just one aspect of your system. I am expecting that you guys practice your designing skills. Okay. Okay. Any more questions? All right then. Bye.